Hey everybody, how is it going? I have been thinking a lot lately about perfectionism and how it shows up in the excuse me, the women that I speak with on a daily basis. And if you asked any of them, they probably would deny being perfectionists. A lot of my clients don't identify with the moniker perfectionist. And I used to be the same way. So I would find myself revising emails out to my team again and again and again to make sure they had just the right tone. And I would be really critical of meetings that I led, well, myself in the meetings that I led, or presentations that I gave. But I would be like, I'm not a perfectionist because look at how messy my office is. Look at how messy my home is. Like, I'm not trying to be perfect. Perfectionism isn't necessarily trying to be perfect. Perfectionism is, what am I trying to say? Tidying up things, spending extra effort on things that you don't necessarily need to for fear, out of fear of not feeling good enough, not being good enough. So I've been reading this book. It's called Ride Big. For those of you who don't know, I ride horses and I'm riding in a show this weekend. And I've had a lot of issues with fear holding me back. And this book has a whole chapter on perfectionism because it's prevalent in a lot of equestrians. And so the definition, according to this book, is perfectionism is a personality characteristic involving a tendency to place excessive emphasis on precision and organization, the setting of and striving for unrealistic personal standards, critical self-evaluation if these standards are not reached, excessive concern over mistakes, and doubts about the quality of personal achievement. So if you ever have been afraid of making a mistake, trying to get everything all lined up perfectly so you don't appear to make a mistake, if you ever have been, let's see, I just lost my thought. Oh yeah, if you've ever find yourself setting the bar really high and then beating yourself up because you failed to achieve it, even though the bar was too high in and of itself, congratulations, you're a perfectionist. So the good news is perfectionism doesn't have to hold you back. I wanted to share a little bit more from this book. So perfectionistic feelings can include shame, frustration, anger, jealousy, anxiety, intolerance, disappointment, and fear. These are all my best friends. I don't know about yours. Perfectionist thoughts can include, if I make a mistake, it's no good. It's never good enough. I feel like a failure. I have to get it right. Perfectionistic actions can include a tendency to procrastinate, intolerance to criticism or feedback, defensiveness, an all or nothing attitude, a focus on results, and being obsessively organized. I fit all of those except for the obsessively organized. So the drivers for perfectionism are having to be perfect to be acceptable to others, fear of mistakes, and the fear of watchers' opinions. And I've noticed that that's where a lot of the perfectionism comes within myself and within a lot of the women that I work with, is the fear of what other people will think if we make a mistake. So there are I'll give you a couple of quick tips for managing perfectionism when it shows up. So when you notice yourself worrying about making a mistake, or perhaps you've noticed that you've made a mistake and you're freaking out because you're just waiting for someone else to catch it and call you on it, that, my friends, is perfectionism. And what I want to remind you first and foremost is, I know you know cognitively that perfect doesn't exist. It's not a thing. And I know you know cognitively that if you were perfect, it would be super boring because you would be like, oh, everything I do is perfect. This is boring, because you would never have a challenge, right? So I know you know that cognitively, but your subconscious mind doesn't know that. And unfortunately, your subconscious mind drives the bus more often than not. So remember, humans are messy. Being a human is messy. Anytime you find perfectionism flaring up, is that fear of making a mistake or fear of others' judgment or fear of your own judgment, remind yourself it's okay to be human. The second thing is, for example, if you have a presentation coming up, I do this when I find myself getting super perfectionistic before a client session. I remind myself, and you can remind yourself, to focus on the other person more than you focus on yourself. So when I find myself going down the negative self-talk train, and I do because I'm still human, before a client session, while I'm preparing for it, I'll remind myself that my clients don't hire me to be in my brain and be in my thoughts. My clients hire me to help understand their brains, and I need to be focused on them. So same thing, if you're leading a meeting, giving a presentation, having dinner with your in-laws, the more that you can shift your focus to the other person or your audience and what they need, and stop focusing on yourself and how you're screwing it up, the more you can focus on service, the more it will diffuse your perfectionism. I'm not saying it'll go away. You'll still have a human brain, and human brains come with this fantastic feature that's called self-criticism, but at least it will help diffuse it. The second tool that I want to teach you is called the minimum baseline. So let's see. It tells you that you need to, so perfectionism tells you that you need to do everything all at once and perfectly. The minimum baseline tells you that you need to choose one thing at a time and do it a little bit consistently. So perfectionism is, I have to eat strictly paleo or I'll never lose weight and look good. Minimum baseline is, I'm going to make one meal a day paleo for a month, then add a second meal and work on that for a month, then add the third meal and work on that for a month. Perfectionism is, I should go to bar twice a week, yoga twice a week, lift weights and run a marathon. Minimum baseline is, I'm going to go to one yoga class a week until that becomes completely effortless and habitual, and then I'll add a second class to the week and repeat the process. So a big challenge of perfectionism is wanting to make totally unrealistic plans and then never keep them. That's kind of the perfectionist signature hobby. So if you found yourself cramming your calendar full of things and then not being able to do them all, and then being disappointed in yourself, that's a symptom of perfectionism. Because you're always doing that, you lose the ability to rely on yourself. And not being able to rely on yourself erodes confidence, because self-trust and self-reliance is one of the cornerstones of confidence. So if you lose integrity with yourself, not because you're a terrible person, but because your brain is driving you to make unrealistic plans that you can't possibly keep. And then, of course, since you don't keep them, they just become more and more abstract and they stop really being actual plans. The more you make unrealistic plans and don't keep them, the more making plans becomes like this theoretical activity. Most of the time, you already know that you're not really going to do them, but making them gives you this brief respite from your critical self-talk about not doing enough. And that's really the rub, because that's where the unrealistic plans come from. You're telling yourself you're not doing enough, so you cram more into your calendar and you cram more goals and higher level goals so that you think you'll feel better about yourself when you achieve them. But really, you physically can't do all of the things that you've given yourself to do. And so you don't do them, and that further erodes self-trust. So when you're putting your self-esteem on your eating plan or your exercise plan or your work calendar or whatever else, you're making it impossible to succeed. You actually can't. It's too much weight to put on it. Because you put your self-esteem on it, you then think whatever it is, your workout plan, your eating plan, your work goals, because you put your self-esteem and your value on it, then you think it has to be perfect for you to feel okay about yourself. And because humans aren't perfect, it's never perfect. And then when you can't keep to your perfect plan, you say mean things to yourself and you feel terrible. So then you need a new plan to try to feel better about yourself. So you make another perfect plan and you assure yourself that starting tomorrow, you'll be perfect. So the cycle goes on. And every time you make a perfect plan and don't follow it, you get farther away from your own relationship with yourself and your own ability to make and keep commitments to yourself. And then you use that as more evidence that you're a bad person lacking in discipline. But you're not. You're misunderstanding why you can't stick to your plan. Your problem is not that you don't have any discipline. Your problem is that you're staking your self-worth on the plan. So the first thing you have to do is separate your self-worth from the plan. Any plan, whatever it is. Your self-worth cannot depend on how much you work out, what you eat, how much work you get done. anything else. But I want to teach you something in addition to that, which is that you have to practice the minimum baseline. And you're not going to like it because it's not going to give you the big dopamine rush that you get from imagining your pretend perfect self who has the perfect diet, exercise, and work calendar. The minimum baseline will seem boring and pointless to you, but it's the exact opposite. The minimum baseline is how you build an actual lasting habit and develop that kind of integrity with yourself. It's how you develop the kind of relationship with yourself where if you say you'll do something, you know you'll do it. You don't get there with ambitious, perfect plans. You get there bit by bit. Think about your relationship with someone else. If you meet a stranger and they immediately declare their undying love, you would not trust them. That's weird, right? If they're like, let's go to Paris for 2 weeks together. I just met you today. You'd be like, Instead, when you meet someone new, you make a new friend or even a new romantic relationship, you build trust through the little ways that you show up for each other over time. They make plans to meet for coffee and they show up for coffee. When you text them, they text you back. Small, consistent actions over time is what builds any kind of relationship, including your relationship with yourself. So whatever area you're working on, your minimum baseline should be the smallest commitment you can make that you know you can follow through on. And when I say you know you can follow through on it, you're going to have to manage your mind to follow through, probably. Your brain's not going to want to do the thing. I don't mean that you could follow through without ever managing your mind, but it just should feel doable when you set it. You shouldn't have that secret knowledge that you'll never actually do it. You really need to think to yourself, not what would I like to do, but what can I actually see myself doing? So for example, if you're trying to create an exercise routine, your minimum baseline might start with just taking a 20-minute walk 3 times a week or a 10-minute walk 3 times a week. And the perfectionistic brain doesn't like that. It seems boring and pointless, but it's not. If you actually go for your walk 3 times a week consistently, you're doing way more for your body than it does to make elaborate plans, buy a gym membership, go every day for a week, and then not go for 4 months and start the cycle all over again. The point of the minimum baseline is not necessarily to get results so much as to build consistent habits and trust with yourself. That's what builds confidence. You'll get results over time in whatever you're working on, whether it's writing a novel, increasing your cardio fitness. But you can't focus on the results because then your brain will say, if we want that result, let's do this perfect aggressive plan instead, which you'll naturally not do. Okay, so thinking about goals that you want to achieve. Instead of thinking about setting these big, huge goals and then imagining your future self achieving them and getting a dopamine hit because your future self is good enough and your future self enjoys or achieves the thing, I want you to think about dialing it back a little bit and know that your brain's not going to like that. Your brain's used to setting big, lofty goals, not achieving them, and then beating yourself up. I want you to work on the minimum baseline. Think about setting what is the tiniest fraction of a goal that I can set that I can actually follow through on. Because most people overestimate what they can do in a day, but underestimate what they can do in a year. So you'll get a lot farther by taking tiny, tiny, tiny baby steps on a regular basis than you would by setting big leaps on a less frequent basis. Okay, here's what I want you to take away. Perfectionism doesn't mean that you want to be perfect. It means that you are afraid of making mistakes. You're afraid of how you will appear to other people. It means that you are afraid of beating yourself up. So you spend a lot of extra time and energy setting these perfect plans and creating these big goals, failing, and then eroding self-trust with yourself and reinforcing that fear of failure. So what you need to do instead, a couple quick hacks, focus on the other person, and then set minimum baseline goals, the tiniest action that you can take that will still move you forward so that you build trust with yourself. That will help you start rebuilding your confidence so that you're less afraid of making mistakes, less afraid of appearing weak or inadequate or whatever else in front of other people. And you'll start to establish some credibility with yourself, which is the most important thing. All right, go do it. Hope you have a good day.